As you know, I'm all about perfection, and that includes the perfection of reading. Luckily, there's a tag for that. Cheers. Welcome back, everybody, to me doing something book adjacent, by which I mean a book tag, and this is the perfection of reading tag. I was tagged by Pat from Book Chat with Pat, and she got tagged by the originator of this, that is over at Reading from the Depths. I'll put all the information, including the questions and everything, down in the description, so you know what this is all about. And thanks for tagging me, Pat. This came in really handy right now because it keeps me from making other videos, which helps. And so this is about Tibetan Buddhism. I know very little about that, but according to the description, it is that the goal is to live the life of the bodhisattva. Now, I'm more of a bodhisattva, but for now, it is about finding these 6 perfections called pāramitās in Sanskrit and living those 6 perfections. Now, the question is, how do those map to reading? Well, luckily, there's tags for that, and the goal is to answer each of these questions and ideally give like a book recommendation that fits each of these tags. It may or may not be connected to the book or the answer to the tag. That's how this goes, and without further ado, let's go and learn about perfections, shall we? The first perfection is the perfection of generosity, and this is about a book gifting event that kind of stayed in mind, in your mind, and whether you gave a book or you received a book gift, and yeah. This is a bit hard for me because I don't necessarily receive a lot of gifts. Partly that is, of course, for all kinds of reasons. Gifting audiobooks is much harder than you might think because of the way a lot of these websites work and so forth, so I rarely receive audiobook gifts. I do give books from time to time, so I'm gonna settle on first of one of those, and that is that for years now, I every year, both for like Christmas and birthday, I give my mother books as presents because it's kind of a nice thing at this point where she has time to read, and I feel it is really interesting because it also sort of is a way for me and her to talk about things that that help us sort of connect in some way or another, because I've mentioned this before. My mother was definitely very instrumental in me starting down my fantasy journey. Like the first copies of Lord of the Rings that I read were like her German hardcover, very early editions, and so there is that connection that has always been there. And since I obviously read a lot of newer stuff and so forth, I often find books that I feel like might be something that she could be interested in. So that has very much sort of like influenced my reading over the year. Whenever I read a book where I'm like, hey, this sounds like something that would be really cool, and then I usually forget it until I remember it like 2 days before Christmas, and like, holy shit, that was the book that I was thinking about. And but it does sort of like is this like sort of smaller part at the back of my head when I read books, wondering whether that is something I could also give as a present to my mother. And over the years, that has certainly worked better or not so well, depending on what I'm reading. It certainly worked really well with a lot of the Discworld books, so I'm very happy that I got her into Discworld reading. It worked well with Kim Stanley Robinson's Ministry for the Future. Yeah, so it always is a bit about like where I'm at mentally and where she is, or what I think she might be interested in, sort of to create like dialogue, because obviously it's not always easy when you're adults to still have like interesting things to talk about with, your parents in some way or another. So for me, that is one thing that I feel is about the generosity, because it leads to something beyond just giving a book as a gift. As I say, like, I don't necessarily receive a lot of book presents, so I think the last that I received as an actual book present was last year for my birthday from fellow booktuber Cleo over at Bemused Bookworm, and it was a book I really wanted to read for a long time, and it was amazing. And that was, of course, How to Suppress Women's Writing by Joanna Russ, which is definitely one of those books that you should definitely read if you're interested in like a very, very snarky look at books that, I like how genre fiction was, at least in the 60s when this was written, very much a man's show. So it's a really interesting book because it does lay out a lot of, the sexism within the publishing industry that is still there, no matter what, certain people on BookTube keep telling you. And, it looks at that it lays it out, all of these ways that women are generally discriminated against, suppressed in all kinds of arts and other parts of our society, but it does so with a lot of snark, and it's, highly recommend that book if you have not read it yet. So let that be my recommendation in addition to, the question. So that's the first one. The second one is The Perfection of Ethical Discipline. Now, you know, I'm a very disciplined kind of person. No, I'm not. This is about, like, the good things about my reading habits and the bad things about my reading habits. And the good reading habit, why? Good question. I think I'm a fairly constant reader. I do read a lot. And I think I read relatively widely, and I think that is a good thing, that I read both fiction and non-fiction and try to connect these things together. I think that is a good thing about my reading habits. I think the bad reading habit is much easier, and that is that I am really bad when it comes to book recommendations. What I mean is this, like when everyone on BookTube or in my social circuits or wherever, everyone talks about a specific book, and everyone says, it's a great book and you need to read this. I just can't. I just really, really can't. And that is, it may connect to all kinds of other aspects of my personality, me discovering punk rock when I was 12 years old. It all fits that. But like when it comes to, reading popular books, I'm just very much incapable of doing that. I need to wait until everyone has stopped talking about it, and then I can read the book and, possibly even enjoy it. But I'm really bad with disconnecting sort of like public reputation of a book with my experience, and being a bit of a contrarian. Whenever people think a book is good, my chances are that I'm going to read that with the goal of proving that it sucks, and that is not fair towards the book, and that's why I usually am really bad at at reading those kind of books, and often wait until sort of like the hype has died down so I can approach them in a more neutral sort of like way. And I think that is definitely a bad reading habit of mine. As I said, the good reading habits, I guess, is that I read a lot and I read fairly widely. And I try to also read books that help me become a better reader by, reading nonfiction about, literary criticism and fantasy studies and stuff like that. And I think that does help me then appreciate books more afterwards. All right, the next one is The Perfection of Patience. Now, I'm not a very patient person. That is certainly true. This is about a book that you waited for a long time, and the question whether it actually was worth it once you waited for it. And this is interesting. I don't necessarily have like a good overview of like books that come out in like a year or two or whatever, and so I rarely have that. But there were certainly books, and that is in my case, but with me, being reliant on audiobooks, what with, being blind and everything, there are a lot of books that I've wanted to read for a long time that have not had audiobook adaptations or audiobook versions out for a long time, because sometimes, especially with older books, that doesn't happen because, markets and so forth. And if it wasn't done on publication back in the 70s, it probably won't be done now, because who reads books from the 70s? Certainly no, influencers on YouTube or TikTok or whatever, right? So there are sometimes books like that where I was like waiting for the longest time, and then was really happy that they finally were available. And one of those was definitely Foucault's Pendulum by Umberto Eco, which only got like an audiobook release in like autumn 2023, which is interesting for a book that came out in like 1987 or so. And I had read like other Umberto Eco books before. It was very clear that I like Umberto Eco. I also like conspiracy theories, occultism, all of that weird shit. Very much my kind of thing. So I've wanted to read that book for the longest time. And it finally came out as an unabridged audiobook. And what can I say? It was even better, possibly because I had so much time reading, stuff on occultism, on conspiracies, on all that weird shit. So I probably got way more out of it last year when I read it for the first time compared to what I would have gotten out of it if I had read it, 10 years ago when I first was like, hey, I want to read this book. So I think in that regard, maybe I benefited from having that patience, well, that enforced patience, I guess. And I think another one was, in that same sense, the Malazan Book of the Fallen, because that also for a long time did not have audiobooks. And I had read the Black Company series by Glenn Cook, and I loved it, and friends were telling me that, like, the Malazan book is just like that, only better, and I'm like, yeah, I wish. And then finally the audiobooks came out, and they came like, oh, that was kind of torture, because they came out, obviously at that time, all the books were already written, basically, so they came out like one every 6 months, and I was like, and then you get the book and then you read it, and it's like, now I have to wait like 6 more months. And I'm like, well, other people had to wait years for that shit. So maybe I was lucky in that regard. But like, that obviously also paid off massively. So I guess so far the perfection of patience has definitely happened with me. The fourth one is the perfection of joyful effort, which is about a book or series that you struggle with, and then reading at the end did actually pay off. And I think for me, the probably perfect example here is the First Chronicles of Thomas Covenant by Stephen R. Donaldson, which is definitely a book that I struggled with a lot. I don't know if you read the book, they can be kind of hard to read. Thomas Covenant is not exactly, the nicest, most accessible main character. Donaldson's prose is very Tolkien-esque, but sometimes failing, I would argue. So they can be pretty hard, and a lot of people have bounced off those books, especially what with that one scene in book one that everyone knows about, which is about well, not to put a finer point upon it, which is about rape, but once I had finished the whole 3 books, the first trilogy, and sat on it and thought about it some more, I did learn a lot about, and I made a video on that, like a lot about how I relate to my own disability, like internalized ableism, how other people interact with chronic illness and disability and things like that. And so I did take a lot of like personal understanding, self-understanding, I guess, in a lot of ways out of those books, but like the way there was pretty fucking rough. So I guess I don't know if I want to recommend the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant. I think they are well worth reading, but that was certainly the kind of book that definitely I would say was worth the effort, but the effort was pretty fucking intense at the time. I guess another one that I really struggled with, maybe that one is better as a recommendation, was Against the Day by Thomas Pynchon, which was my first Thomas Pynchon novel, and one of the sort of like first English language books that I picked up on my own. And I'm like, hey, I'm gonna listen to this. I always wanted to read Thomas Pynchon. I'm gonna go with Thomas Pynchon. And that was like, I was like 18, 19 years old. Like my first couple of months at university, and I was like, I'm gonna read this now. And oh boy, I learned a lot about my level of English language skill at the time. That was quite brutal. But I mean, Thomas Pynchon is definitely one of my favorite authors, and in that regard, I guess it worked. But yeah, maybe start if you're starting to read in a language that is not your first language. Maybe don't start with Thomas Pynchon is something I can recommend from this one. But yeah, if you haven't read Against the Day, I think it's definitely worth the effort. It will definitely still be a taxing read because it is a long book, but Pynchon does have that quintessential thing that I just so love about Thomas Pynchon, which is it's absurd to the 11th degree at least. It's insanely absurd. It has weird and stupid jokes in there. It has all the craziness, but then once you're like willing to just like throw the thing against the wall because you can't have like more jokes about elephant-sized syringes full of cocaine, which is in that book. Don't you worry. Something creeps in, and you see how he's able to create that atmosphere, that this weird melancholy, this very specific atmosphere that you have a lot of times in Pynchon's world, where Pynchon's writing, where you have this world that, these situations where the world could have gone a really good direction, but it didn't, because we kind of fucked it up as humanity, and we end up in a much darker place. And with Against the Day, this is the era between the Chicago World's Fair and the ending of World War One. So yeah, you can see sort of like this ending of like the 19th century, and a lot of like enthusiasm for like new technologies and stuff, and freedom and labor rights, and all of that kind of stuff being a big deal in like the late 19th, early 20th century, and then it all, you know, gets crushed, you know, politically, with, you know, America deciding to just like take all the Wobblies, put them into jail because they were like, hey, maybe war is not that good. All of that kind of stuff. In that regard, it is a brilliant book. Highly recommended. You should read it. It is definitely going to take you a while, and you'll learn a lot of weird stuff about, among other things, obscure alpine dragons, which hang out in mountain tunnels in Switzerland, apparently. So it's a brilliant book. That is what I can say about Joyful Effort. All right. The next one is The Perfection of, I forgot the exact word. It is about... the perfection of concentration. Yeah. You can tell, like, very much my thing, what with all that ADHD and things. It's about what we do to get ready, or to improve our reading, to get in the reading zone where I read that kind of stuff. And, I think the main thing for me is, and this is once again like a combination of a lot of things, like, since I do rely heavily on audiobooks, and I have ADHD, which is not the best, you know, combination, because as a lot of you probably know, listening to audiobooks can be very easy to sort of like drift off mentally and go like, think about something completely different. So what I've learned, for me to sort of focus on my reading, what I usually do is try to do something simple, manual things at the same time, because then I can, you know, focus on that, but that doesn't take away from, from my paying attention to like what I'm listening to. In that regard, doing the dishes, putting up laundry, that kind of stuff. When I started doing my videos for the Malasan Book of the Fallen at the time, I was doing a lot of knitting. Knitting is perfect for me. I can knit socks, hats, whatever. I just need people who want to have all of those knitted things, because I'm really, really, not good at giving gifts and stuff. But yeah, knitting is one of those things that I like to do while reading, while listening to something, because it helps me focus. It is the thing. And the other part is, of course, I listen to audiobooks while I'm at the gym, which allows me to get a lot of reading done. And once again, it's like you do something repetitive, physical, that don't actually needs a lot of, actual like mental labor, but it keeps the rest of my brain sort of like occupied enough for me to focus on what I'm listening to. So that's what I do about that. I was going to say, like, a book that I can recommend from that is, of course, the Bible, which I've listened to at the gym several times for reasons. And the Old Testament goes down really well when you're, lifting or running or whatever, because, all that suffering pairs really well with the physical exhaustion. But that's usually what I do, is, do something at the same time so I can focus. Okay, that's the fifth one. But what will be the sixth? Yeah, I've forgotten. Yeah, I guess I have to look that up and come back in a second. Well, it was The Perfection of Wisdom, a book in which I learned something. Now, obviously, that's easy. I read a lot of nonfiction, so obviously I learned things. But in this case, it's also about like something surprising. So I have two books here. One of them was for me, The Triumph of the Moon by Ronald Hutton, which is a book about modern witchcraft and neo-paganism. And what I learned in that one was about specific secret societies in late 18th century England and Scotland, including the Magical Horseman's Word, which is something that then shows up in Terry Pratchett's Lancre series. And now finally I understood that one joke that Terry Pratchett made that probably, 10 people got, because who cares about the secret societies of people that have to deal with, heavy draft horses in 18th century Scotland. Probably not that many people. So yeah, that's something surprising I learned, and I really, really found that fascinating. And the other thing is, once again, the Bible. It's one of those fascinating books that I like to read from time to time. In this case, last time I reread it, I learned from the book of Deuteronomy that there is a divine commandment to build a parapet around the roof of your house so no one falls off the roof and dies and brings blood on your house. And I was not aware of divine building codes. Now I am, and it's one of those things I will probably never forget. And yeah, I learned something. Isn't that fun? So yeah, I guess I don't know what kind of book to recommend here, because, find a book and you'll always learn something surprising. That's kind of how books work. Yeah, maybe just read the Bible. You'll learn a lot of things you were not aware of. Trust me. Yeah, those were the 6 perfections. Then it remains for me to tag someone. And I'm really bad at the tagging stuff, because I'm so sort of set apart from a lot of regular bookish content creators in a lot of ways. And I just tagged a lot of people. But Britain, it's your time, because this time round you didn't tag me, so I get to tag you. That's how that works, right? So I'm very, very happy with that. You get to do that one. And I am going to tag Witchy Reese, because I haven't tagged her in a while. And I think there might be some really interesting answers for us there. If you want to also do this tag, go ahead. Tag, feel tagged. I think that's how this goes. Anyway, once again, thanks for tagging me, Pat. I hope this was interesting to anyone. I'll be back when I talk about something very different, probably tomorrow, who knows. And until then, thanks and cheers.